And we're live. We're live, guys, here at another episode of Good Morning Liberty. Thank you so much for tuning in and watching. My name is Michael Boldin, and Good Morning Liberty is only here at the 10th Amendment Center. We are broadcasting live this morning. It is Wednesday, August the 15th at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time here in downtown Los Angeles. So good morning to you. Good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happen to be watching, whether it's live or in the archives. I want to thank you so much for being here with me. Today, I want to talk a little bit and primarily focus only on the new 2019 National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA, that was it. Oh, and of course, I can't forget to say, smash the likes. Make sure to smash those likes. If you're watching and you're enjoying the show, you find it interesting, hit that like button, whether it's here on YouTube or if you find the link posted on Facebook, Twitter, where else. And make sure to share the information with others to help these networks tell other people that you think it's good to see. And they will be more likely to share the information and the video with other people. And of course, always leave some comments. I would love to hear your thoughts about what we're covering today and what you might be interested in hearing about in the future. So today, I want to talk about this NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. It's this huge spending bill. And I know there's been a lot of people covering it. But I also want to talk a little bit about the signing statement. It's a pretty big signing statement that Donald Trump gives with the bill. And lazy viewer, I want to thank you for tuning in again. I really appreciate you being here with all these episodes. Lazy viewer says, ew, NDAA is full of junk usually. I'm sure this year's is no different at all. And I haven't read the whole thing. I don't think I ever will. But yes, of course, we can go back to the 2012 NDAA, which is one of the most well-known ones that actually included a provision to authorize indefinite detention of Americans under that law that is still in effect today. So I want to talk about this, cover the signing statement, which I think is really interesting as well. And there's some very interesting perspective that I hope that you'll find on this as well. So let's get to it. Our first article comes from Reason Magazine, just to cover the introduction of or the signing of the legislation. And man, I really got to get some ad blockers, or Reason is really bad. They are just blasted with these kind of animated ads, but we'll cover that another time. So Trump signs $82 billion spending boost for the Pentagon. Now, if you're watching this and you're thinking, oh, $82 billion for federal programs, that's no big deal. I don't know if the title is all that great on this, because it was $82 billion increase. So actually, with the increased spending, the Pentagon will get to spend more than $700 billion next year. They're getting close to $1 trillion in spending on this, which is, in my mind, absolutely insane. And what I found most interesting from this report over at Reason is that, according to Donald Trump, this year's NDAA is, quote, the most significant increase in our military and our warfighters in modern history. It was not very hard. I went to Congress, I said, let's do it. We got to do it. So it wasn't even difficult for him to get this passed. The largest spending bill for defense for NDAA in modern times, $700 billion. Not much of a debate, not much opposition as well. And as Reason notes, this is from Eric Boehm, I believe is the journalist or reporter over there. He says, indeed, it was not very hard. Democrats are quick to condemn nearly everything Trump proposes. They really are. It is that whole Trump derangement syndrome that I keep talking about on both sides. The Democrats quickly condemn, and then the Republicans generally support basically every single thing. So, and that's how he put it. Democrats are quick to condemn nearly everything Trump proposes, and many Republicans are less than enamored with the current occupant of the White House. I don't know. I mean, sometimes they'll talk, but I think when it gets down to the votes, they all end up kind of getting in line and following whatever is going to increase the power of the government. But partisan animosity vanishes when it comes to defense spending. The vote was 359 to 54 on the John S. McCain National Defense Authorization Act. 359 to 54. And the final Senate roll call was 87-10, with only 2 Republican senators opposing the bill and 3 declining to cast votes. Now, there's no funding for the Space Force, but Trump is assuring everyone that it's going to happen anyways by 2020, and it's not going to be cheap. So we're going to see even more spending. We may get to $1 trillion. Now, as I reported, maybe it was 2-3 episodes ago, sometime last week, there's this great article over at fff.org that I covered more in depth than I will right now from Jacob Hornberger. Actually, this one's it's Hornberger's organization, but this is from Lawrence Vance. And he pointed out that the U.S. spends more on national defense than China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, India, France, United Kingdom, and Japan combined. Already spending more. And then, of course, the message is that somehow they have to increase it because the military is getting depleted, because the spending increases have been less. Now, they talk about how Obama cut the military, gutted the military. He was only reducing the increases, so he was actually still increasing the spending. That always goes up. And Lawrence actually notes that the total spending on national security is already over $1 trillion. The NDAA bills are just still over $716 billion. And they say, according to Defense Secretary James Mattis, that the $82 billion will bring us back to a position of primacy. Now, this is pretty absurd when you think that the U.S., or you recognize that the U.S. is already spending more than I think the next 10 countries combined, or the next 9 combined. Somehow spending more will bring us back to primacy. Clearly, the U.S. is the number 1 defense spender on Earth by far. There's no one even close. So either people are just completely ignorant about the fact, but they might be just completely ignorant, or maybe they don't care, or who knows. But the mentality of this propaganda that the U.S. Military is being depleted, it's falling to pieces, that it has to get back on top is absurd. It's been on top all along. It's not even close. It's not by a long shot. So Lawrence pointed that out, and he said that the entire military budget for Russia, the so-called country that is interfering with all of our elections, the dangerous enemy, the former Soviet state, the new Cold War, the entire Russian military budget is only $61 billion. The entire Russian military budget is less than the amount that the NDAA increased spending from last time. So just to put that in perspective. Now, with that in mind, I want to kind of get into a few of the things that are going on with this bill. Justin Amash points out that it authorizes billions of dollars of spending on undeclared wars. There hasn't been a declaration of war since World War II. No matter what they tell you about the Iraq AUMF or the AUMF in 2001, Aviator Tom, it makes a really good point. They need to rename it a World Policing Front or an Offense Fund. It certainly is not National Defense Authorization. It is a World Police Fund. That certainly is true. So Amash points out that they're going to continue spending on all these undeclared wars. I've pointed out a number of times how Obama dropped more bombs, engaged in more war actions than even George Bush did. And so far, after 1 year, the per-year amount of bombs coming from the Trump administration is far higher than even the Obama administration, which is the worst in modern times. And Amash is correct in that this will continue funding these undeclared wars. And according to the Constitution, the Congress has the power of the purse. So it is their job to stop giving money to the government to continue unconstitutional programs. But you can't rely on anyone but a small handful of people. A small handful, yeah, that's right. Aviator Tom says it's a fund. It's a World Policing Fund, correct, not front. But in a way, it's a front, too. They've been fronting that they're constitutional and that they're supposed to be doing this, but they continue funding, as you point out, Tom, that it's driving things to the ground. So the Congress isn't supposed to be doing this at all. They're supposed to withhold funding for all kinds of unconstitutional programs, whether it's unconstitutional wars or it's unconstitutional gun control or marijuana prohibition. They're supposed to stop taking your money, but we can't rely on Congress. Congress is totally corrupt. They're dangerous. And presidents, whether it's a Bush or a Clinton or an Obama or a Trump, they are all very happy to continue signing these types of things into law. Woodsider says spending like this can only go on for so long before the government either runs out of money or they begin inflating the currency, which in turn destroys our savings. That is correct, and I think that process started maybe a century ago, if you really think about it. The inflation starting all the way back to the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, they have been inflating the currency. What they do is they print more money, because there's only so much that they can extract from us through taxes. They can only steal so much money from our labor, from our hard-earned money, from our income. As people like you and I, we're struggling just to get by. It's not an easy thing to do sometimes, especially for people with families. I don't have children, and I can't imagine how hard it is to have two working parents and still struggling to get by. And then the taxes. The spending is so massive that sooner or later it can't continue. Things that can't go on forever don't. I heard this. Ron Paul always talked about one of the books or a series of books that he referenced on foreign policy, written by a former CIA asset who passed away, Chalmers Johnson. And I saw him give a speech many years ago, and he basically talked about this kind of spending, the amount of money being borrowed from China to continue the budgets, the spending, the deficits, the debt. He said things that can't go on forever don't, and that's absolutely correct. It cannot continue like this forever, but they're going to keep pushing it until there's a complete crisis. Amash continues, not just the undeclared wars, unconstitutional wars, but it also supports U.S. refueling of Saudi planes in the horrific Yemen war. They're slaughtering people there in Yemen, and the U.S. is making that happen. They're using U.S. military assets. The U.S. is providing all kinds of logistic support to the Saudi military, so that is also helping. And as I was mentioning, Lazy Viewer talked about how, at the beginning here, how the NDAA always has all kinds of garbage, and back in 2012 they had indefinite detention, and Amash correctly points out that this NDAA continues to condone the unconstitutional indefinite detention of Americans without charge or trial. He voted no, and he rightly voted no, because no matter what you may think about funding the military, there's only one way to fund the military, and that is by doing it in line with the Constitution. That's the only way. There is no, well, everybody else wants to violate the law, so let's give them what they need. Well, then nothing ever changes. If you want to follow the Constitution, you have to follow it no matter what the situation. And this should have been an easy vote for a lot of people. Kudos for Justin Amash for rejecting this. I know he actually tried to include an amendment, as he has done a number of times now, to actually rescind or overturn this NDAA indefinite detention provision. I don't know if it even got a hearing. It certainly was rejected. People like Paul Ryan certainly don't like that. He's awful. And a lot of the committee chairs, they don't like that either. They want to keep the indefinite detention. They like government having this kind of power. So it's not good. Now, over at antiwar.com, Jason Ditz, who I read pretty regularly, he points out that Trump issued a pretty massive signing statement with the bill on Monday night. He revealed that he intends to ignore many of the myriad provisions of the 2019 NDAA, the $716 billion military spending bill. He's going to ignore it. Trump suggested that he'd ignore all the limitations placed on the Yemen war. That was one of the big things that I heard some libertarians saying, well, okay, let's at least look for the positive. I like looking for the positive on things. I generally do. And a lot of the legislation that we get passed here at 10th Amendment Center, a lot of it is just small steps, especially on things like surveillance. Okay, they're going to stop sharing data. The local people are going to stop sharing data with the federal government. That's a positive. I like small steps. And so one of the things that has been kind of promoted on this is the fact that there are some limitations on involvement in the Yemen war. And it also required Congress to get an assessment of war crimes. But Trump said he's going to ignore that. He's going to ignore the limitations on participating in the Yemen war and a bunch of other things. Now, here's the thing. I've talked about this quite a bit, and I know I've talked about this in regards to, for example, the Trump administration ramping up enforcement through the ATF, whether it's the ATF or Trump ordering this or it's just the deep state continuing, how the federal government has ramped up enforcement of federal gun control laws even worse than what was happening under Barack Obama. And we sent out an email, and Mike Meharry did a report on this. We talked about how, well, the worst case scenario is it shouldn't be any worse than Obama. It should always be less enforcement of federal gun control. He should just stop enforcing this. And we got a significant amount of feedback on this from many self-identified Republicans and Trump supporters who said, well, what do you want? He's got to enforce the law. That's his job. He's supposed to enforce the law. Well, that's not the case. And I've pointed out how Thomas Jefferson made it very clear, especially in response to the Alien and Sedition Acts, which is part of what he rode into power to oppose. He rode in to become the president as part of opposition to this, that it was his duty. He wrote to Abigail Adams some year later because of the conflict, public conflict between him and former President John Adams. He's supposed to, as Justin Bayola says, he's supposed to be a check on the other powers. Absolutely. The president is supposed to uphold the law. Now, we have to keep in mind that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, not just any old thing that Congress passes. So Jefferson said it wasn't just his opinion, but because he viewed the Alien and Sedition Acts, this violation of free speech, you couldn't put the president into ill repute in the media, or they would shut down different printers, for example. It was his duty to undermine and refuse to enforce it at every turn possible. That was his duty because he took an oath to support the Constitution, and it was his belief that that law passed violated his oath. So this is absolutely correct. And in fact, I can make the argument, well, it's maybe a little convoluted, that if Trump thinks these provisions of the NDAA are unconstitutional, he should absolutely voice that opinion. He absolutely should say that. That's his job. And he says this over and over in this signing statement that he issued. He says, I've signed, Jason Ditz over at Antiwar says it's 15 pages. I copied and pasted into Word. Maybe the font size is different. It's a pretty long signing statement. There's about, and I didn't count all of them. I should probably put it into a spreadsheet. He lists in different sections. As I scroll through this, you can see all these different sections of the NDAA that he's talking about. 141, 147, 1242, etc., etc. He lists in paragraph by paragraph how these various sections raise what he calls constitutional concerns. I applaud the Congress, he writes, for passing this bill to provide the DoD with the resources it needs to support our armed forces and keep America safe. As we noted, Woodsider pointed out, well, Aviator Tom also pointed out, both of you pointed out, that this isn't about keeping people safe. This is an offensive fund, and it will destroy the value of the currency. And you can't be safe when the economy comes into shambles. That is a very dangerous situation. So this is false, but he says, I note, however, that the bill includes several provisions that raise constitutional concerns. And he goes on to go through all the different sections that he considers unconstitutional, whether Trump himself considers this or his lawyers or advisors, his team, who knows? But he's the one that's signing the bill. He's the one that's issuing this signing statement. You can see his name at the bottom. So he takes the responsibility for this, no matter who's saying what on this. And he's talking about these various things. He can't be restricted from engaging or supporting the war in Yemen. That's one of them. Well, that's the thing. If you think it's unconstitutional, and it's already on the books, it absolutely is his job to not enforce those. He should immediately stop enforcing federal gun control measures. He should reprioritize the ATF, and the ATF should stop enforcing all the gun control laws on the books. And then he should go to Congress. Maybe he should put out a signing statement, a press release, and he should immediately say, I believe gun control. I'm the NRA-backed Second Amendment, pro-Second Amendment candidate, and gun control is a violation of the Second Amendment, and the federal government should immediately stop doing these. I know you keep funding it, but I'm going to make a big deal out of this. That's the pro-Second Amendment candidate that the country needs. That's the pro-Second Amendment president. Anything else is not. So he should do this. It is his duty to refuse to enforce the things that Congress unconstitutionally shoves in his face or previous presidents leave for him. It's a risky approach, but it certainly is his duty. And we know if it's between Thomas Jefferson and somebody else's opinion, I'm going to go with what Jefferson had to say. Madison also pointed this out. I think it was Federalist 44 that I referenced a few days ago, talking about how, this is part of the process. In order if Congress is going to do a bunch of things that consolidate power, Madison pointed out that it still would rely on the courts and the president to give it effect. So he's saying, look, the president, he's not always going to give effect to these things. And absolutely, it would be his duty to not enforce these things. Now, if this was already on the books, this NDAA, which, there's a new one every year. But if there are provisions of the NDAA on the books, Trump could easily, and he certainly should, make the point that there are parts of it that he believes are unconstitutional and that he will not be restrained by that. Now, I actually think his constitutional arguments, especially on the constraint of executive power, are totally wrong. He's taking a position of what's called the unitary executive theory, that the executive has total latitude and can do whatever the executive wants on certain issues, and it's a very broad view that goes way beyond anything of the founders. Maybe we can get into that in more detail in the future. But I disagree vehemently with his constitutional reasoning, but I certainly support the idea that the president shouldn't enforce things that the president believes to be unconstitutional. But the problem is he's issuing a signing statement saying this. He's actually signing into law something that he thinks has about 30 provisions that violate the Constitution. So by signing it, he's actually made it law. All these things are unconstitutional, but I'm going to make it law. And then there's going to be the precedent that all these things are law that I disagree with. Well, what's the next president going to do? That's not a principled constitutionalist. That's not what you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to put it on the law books. You should actually have a statement that says, I disagree with all these provisions. Here is why. Amend this legislation, send it to me without those, and then I'll sign it. Now, Madison, James Madison as president, I think it was in 1817, one of his last acts, he actually was given this infrastructure spending bill. We've covered it. We have a video here on YouTube that talks about it as well, on how he actually said that he supported the principles, the idea behind getting this infrastructure spending. He actually wanted to see it happen, but he had to veto it anyway because he felt it was unconstitutional. That's exactly how it's supposed to go. So Ward points out that it's the state's job to nullify these federal gun control and all other laws and mandates. Absolutely. Will says, if our source of the issues are unconstitutional tender, then every bill that is funded by that unconstitutional tender should be vetoed. Absolutely correct. Justin Bayola says the checks and balances have become checks, like writing a check and handshakes. Certainly. Thank you guys. I really appreciate you guys all being here with me. This NDAA, like it is every single year, is worse and worse than the previous year. Nothing seems to get overturned. So if you look back at the 2012, this is the one that we all know about, I think, the most. The indefinite detention. Here it is 6 years later, actually 7, because this is the 2019 NDAA. 7 years later, that's still on the books. So these things that Trump thinks are unconstitutional, they're going to be on the books no matter what the next president thinks in the future. This is setting a precedent that these things are now law. Now, I disagree with a lot of his constitutional approach. His advisors, there should be less power in the executive, and Congress has control of the purse. But it's a mess all around. Congress shouldn't be funding all this stuff. Congress shouldn't be giving him all this cash. The U.S. government shouldn't be involved. Shouldn't be running an empire. Shouldn't be policing the world. And the president should be vetoing just about everything that comes to his desk, and then railing on the things that have already been passed. I know he's railed on some things. I'd like to see much more in the future. Otherwise, the jury so far is saying things are not good. It always continues to get worse. So with that, I want to close up with an important reminder from James Madison. Here's our quote of the day. And I think this is very applicable to what we're seeing happen here. The means of defense against foreign danger. Oh, I got to switch over. Here we go. The means of defense against foreign danger have always been the instruments of tyranny at home. And whether that means mass surveillance because there's a defense against the bad guys coming to blow us all up, even though we're the most armed country on earth, we shouldn't be afraid of that. We should be promoting the right to keep and bear arms to defend ourselves. Whether it's mass surveillance or all this mass spending, which continues to create a climate where the economy will struggle, the value of the dollar will continue to go down, and will create more pressure for the Federal Reserve to inflate, which means our purchasing power will go down. These means of defense against protecting, keeping America safe. Trump keeps pointing out that his duty is to keep America safe. No, his duty is to uphold his oath to the Constitution. And Justin is absolutely right. We need to clone the Founding Fathers first before sheep. We need to clone the Founding Fathers first. And Alex Grant says Congress is controlled. They're going to do what they're told, certainly. And I think they're also controlled by their bad principles. So many people are in office that are just awful when it comes to the Constitution and liberty. We shouldn't be surprised at these things, but I think it's important to spread the word. I hope you enjoyed this. I mean, it's not good news at all, but it is very interesting. And I think this perspective about the signing statement and the duty of the president to either refuse to enforce things or veto things that he thinks are unconstitutional is very important. And I hope we can all take that message and get it out to more and more people in the future. Thank you so much for being with me here today. Another episode of Good Morning Liberty. This is the third week now, and we're going to keep doing this every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. So I'll see you back here in a couple of days on Friday morning. Make sure to smash the likes if you're enjoying the content so far. Leave some comments. I would love to hear your suggestions on things that we can cover in the future. So you can either leave some comments on YouTube or Facebook, or send us an email at team@10thamendmentcenter.com. If you want to remain anonymous, you can point that out as well. I won't mention your name if you don't want me to. And of course, I hope you enjoy your Wednesday. Happy Hump Day. And I'll see you here again in a couple of days on Friday morning at Good Morning Liberty.